Welcome to another episode of Mission Healthy Living, brought to you by the Pottstown Health and Wellness Foundation. We are talking today about community gardening, and with us is Laura Washington, the director of the Mosaic Community Garden in Pottstown. And Laura, tell us a little bit about the garden.
Sure, I'm the garden manager. But the gardens are located on Chestnut Street in downtown Pottstown. We have two community gardens. One garden has about 30 garden plots available. The second garden has about 27 plots available for people to rent to garden each year. So how it works is we have a family say, yes, I'm excited, I'd like to grow some fresh vegetables. How do I sign up? And they fill out the paperwork. We have 3 or 4 simple forms for them to fill out. And then there's a fee associated with obtaining a garden plot. It's a small fee, and it ranges between $30 to $55 for families and $110 for businesses. And once their paperwork is complete, the family or organization is assigned a garden plot.
Great.
And at that time, coming up in April and through May, we'll have garden days where those folks can come in, learn more about the garden through our orientation process, volunteer to get acclimated with the gardens, and then also participate in our first open garden day. We
Great.
have days that we call work and play days.
So if someone doesn't feel like they have enough space in their own backyard, there's no excuse. They
Yes.
can always find a space.
Absolutely.
Whether you do have enough space in your own backyard or whether you are going to use the community garden, how would you recommend somebody get started? If someone hasn't really gardened before and they want to grow some vegetables or
Sure.
some fruits or even flowers, how do you begin?
How I began was I just went to the local store and purchased seedlings instead of starting from seed. However, now that I've gardened and I understand it a little more, it's pretty easy to start from seed and grow plants, whether they be vegetable plants or herbs indoors, and then transition them to the outdoors.
So by a seedling, you mean go to the garden store and purchase small tomato plants, for
Yes.
instance. If someone wants to do that and start them indoors, how do they go about transferring them from inside to the outside?
Sure, that can be a tricky subject.
Okay.
What I did my first year was waited until it got a little bit warmer. Around now's the time, maybe another week or two, all
So
depending
beginning
on,
of April?
yes, beginning of
Okay.
April, mid-April, and it usually takes about 5 days for your plants to get totally acclimated to the outdoors. So what I did was I put it in a place where there's part sun and part shade. So you never want to locate the plants in an area that has full sun immediately, because the plants will burn off and die. So I also learned the hard way that to locate my plants on a table or somewhere up high, because what happened was the chipmunks decided that they wanted my seedlings just as much as I wanted them, but they wanted to eat them right away.
So when you say on a table, you mean before you actually put them into the earth, you leave them outside
Yes.
for a while?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Before you actually make the transition, there's a period of time where you leave them in their seedling pots and sit them outside on a tabletop.
So that's what I've been doing
Yes.
wrong. Okay.
There you go. Problem solved.
Okay.
Yes. And then after that, we've got to be mindful of the cooler nights. So just make sure that you cover the plants. I usually use a thin, clear trash bag, like what we would use for recycling.
Okay.
Because it helps retain heat. It helps to also retain moisture, but it keeps the frost from damaging the plants.
Lightly cover or completely cover and wrap around?
Lightly covered.
Lightly
Definitely.
covered. Okay.
You want to make sure that it's secure so that the frost doesn't creep in, but you also don't want to like suffocate or put pressure on the plants.
Okay. Once you have your seedling in the seedling pot and you're going to move it to the ground, how deep are we planting?
Just as deep as the seedling pot was.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be real deep. You actually kind of bury it when you do that, essentially. So just a few inches in the ground. And if you're ever unsure, you can read the back of the seed pack, and that provides all of the information on how to plant it in the ground.
Okay.
Some plants obviously need to go a little deeper than others.
Okay,
in
so
that case.
we have our plant in the ground. Now, how do we water it? How do we care for it? How do we get it to where we can actually
Yeah.
pick something from it?
That part's easy. You water it when it's dry. You water it sometimes when it's not dry. People tend to believe, oh, it rained today, so I don't have to water my vegetables. Essentially, if the sun has been shining, we still want to add a little water to the soil. So we always want to make sure the soil is moist and that the soil is easily aerated. So if you have soil that kind of feels like clay or looks like clay when it gets dry, you may want to add some additional compost to it, some topsoil, or maybe even some sand, all depending on what you've planted, in order to ensure that there's good drainage for that plant.
Okay, all right. How about fertilizer? Is that a good idea to add fertilizer to the soil?
Sure.
Throughout the,
Yes, you can add fertilizer. I would say buying the organic fertilizer is the best, so I would go for the organic, and all fertilizers are not created equal. So I would recommend that you read the back of the fertilizer bag to be sure that it's appropriate for the plants that you're growing, and it's also appropriate for the soil and the area.
What are we looking at in terms of weeding and maintenance with regards to that?
All depending on what you grow. Of course, things like pole beans and peas that you may have to trellis, which means tie it up so that it has a space to grow and a lead. You may not have to weed as much because sometimes they take care of themselves. But something that that's a little bit different, like a tomato plant, it provides a lot of shade to the ground, so we tend to get a lot of odd grasses and weeds and plants that kind of look like it might be a tomato plant. I swear they morph.
Yes, yes.
And it looks like a tomato plant, but it's really not, and you got to wait a little bit, but those plants require more weeding and more care.
Okay, okay. Is there something to plant if I'm starting out that is kind of a winner? Because I think people sometimes want that instant gratification, and so some things are certainly harder to grow than others.
Yes, I agree. I would say herbs would be the best bet in the beginning. Start off with a nice herb garden. There's so many different herbs out there, and there's so many variations. Basil, for instance, you can have a purple basil, a green basil, a basil that has a pineapple flavor to it. So it's a fun way to get kids used to, enjoying herbs and seeing that there are so many variations that you can, pull a leaf off, rinse it off, and taste it. And I just recommend like a pizza garden. So it would have tomatoes, it would have oregano, basil, green peppers.
Wow.
Things like
that.
that.
Sounds
yeah,
great.
That's a pretty easy garden to grow.
And very fun for kids
Yes,
as well.
absolutely.
Mosaic Community Garden. How did it get its name?
That I'm unsure of. I
been
believe
around.
because of my take of Mosaic is because of the eclectic community that we live in.
Great.
So our community is like a mosaic
Like
piece.
a mosaic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of relationships formed over the garden.
Yes.
Over the last few years.
Absolutely.
It's a place for people to go to get advice.
Yes.
And they're not going to be alone. So if someone's unsure of gardening, what a great way to start.
Absolutely. I agree.
Terrific. Great.
Definitely.
And give us a little bit of information about your website, and you have a garden contest coming up.
Yes, we have